Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Working Together, Arts Funding, Solidarity, and Non-hierarchical, program structures. My name is Jamie Sharp, and I'm the program manager here at Grantmakers in the Arts. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a light-skinned Black femme with an afro with a fabulous coat that has a fun blue and pink and also yellow design. GIA is headquartered on the unceded land of the Lenape and Wappinger peoples. We ask you to join in acknowledging the Lenape and Wappinger communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Before beginning our webinar, please take a minute to review the Zoom features so that you have an optimal experience with us today. If you have a question for our tech team during the webinar, feel free to use the chat function and send a message directly to Grantmakers in the Arts. Otherwise, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit questions for the presenters. If you would like your experience to include live captioning, select the closed caption or CC feature in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitles. In this webinar, we ask, how do we think of ways of funding structurally based on a trust model? Can we build ourselves around artists' desires and individual choices? Today, we will explore various funding processes currently working in the field that use non-hierarchical or a solidarity-based approach. Today's webinar is an interactive session that encourages participants to consider obstacles and possibilities in giving agency of program design and decision-making to artist-centered and non-hierarchical approaches. Breakout sessions will be facilitated by advocates of the solidarity economy movement, including members of Art.coop. And without further ado, I will hand it over to today's speakers.
Hi, folks. It is such an honor and pleasure to be here in this space with you. My name is Sruti or Shruti. I use they, them pronouns. I'm calling from the lands of the Munsee Lenape, Canarsie people. Some people call it Brooklyn. And I am really excited for all of you and for myself to hear and learn from our amazing panelists who are here with us, Randi Berry, Haowen Wang, and Salem Tsegaye. I'm going to jump right in, and Randi, I'm going to start with you, but maybe after you take this question, you can pass it on. Same question for everyone. If you could start us off by sharing a little bit about yourself and a story about when your needs were met and when you met another person's needs, right? A story about solidarity.
Thanks so much, Shruti. Hi, everyone. I'm Randi Berry. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a white woman with gray-brown hair, dark-rimmed glasses, and I'm sitting in a room with a yellow background and some paintings on the wall, and I'm calling from Munsee Lenape land. So when I think of solidarity as a person and not just as a grant maker or a service organization or community organizer, I'm thinking about myself as a mother, and I've experienced a tremendous amount of solidarity with other mothers, working mothers, and folks that are raising other humans. And a moment of solidarity that I always think about is when I'm standing at the bottom of a subway stairs and with my stroller, and a New Yorker just comes and picks up my stroller and walks up the stairs with me without saying a word. Sometimes it's just with a nod, but 100% of the time, if I wait there for just a minute, a New Yorker grabs my stroller and brings it upstairs with me. And, you know, I appreciate an act of solidarity that is not, you know, a religious impulse or an institutional requirement, but just us being human beings together on this planet. So that's that. Haowen?
Thank you.
Thank you, Randi. I really love, as a parent, I also love parenting stories. Hello, everyone. Haowen Wang. I use he, him pronouns. My day job is at Dance USA. I am the director of regranting there. I'm speaking to you from the unceded land of the Piscataway and the Susquehannock peoples, known today as Central Maryland. My story of solidarity is indeed work related, but it touched me in a very personal way, so I'd like to quickly share it. I was in a Dance USA conference last year in Atlanta, where we had a group of 30 artists that was joined from our fellowship program that was joining the conference, and I was, of course, in charge of taking care of them. A few of the artists I either could not attend or they decided not to attend. It was still at the sort of the tail end of the many versions of Omicron. So as much as possible, I tried to make the cohort experience at the conference as much hybrid as possible. And it was a lot of work for a single person department. And at some point during all of the activities that was going on, the artists started to just bypass me, right? And simply pull out their phone and FaceTime one of the few artists, right? And then, FaceTiming, and then there was also a blind dance artist that weren't there. So they would also offer image description of what's going on. I remember very clearly that we were in a West African dance workshop, and then one of the artists was FaceTiming the blind artists that weren't there. Yale wasn't there, and then they were describing the image description of what the action, and then the artist was like, "Haowen, hold this! I'm gonna jump on stage and dance," and then off she went, and I started to say, yes. So shake your booty, shake your booty, and so it was a very pleasant experience. And later, the Yale said that it was that they were very moved, and that when Haowen started describing this event. Basically, that's all I said. So that was a very moving moment for me. So I like to share that to the space. And I'll pass it to Salem.
Thanks, Haowen. Hi, everyone. My name is Salem Tsegaye. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Black woman with my black hair pulled back into a bun. I have on a black cardigan and brown framed glasses, and I am joining today from the unceded lands of the Munsee Lenape. So my, I guess, story of solidarity is kind of a throwback, and I actually appreciated this question because it did, make me think about sort of where some of my earlier understandings of this come from without actually knowing that it was really solidarity, and it's within a family context. So when I was much younger, I had really severe asthma. And I remember when I was like 9, I had to be hospitalized. And that time actually coincided with my maternal grandmother's death. And so it was really a tough time because I remember I'm like 9 years old, hospitalized. My mother is at home, like mourning, and there are so many people coming in and out of the house to kind of support her and show her sympathy, and she's not able to be there for me in the hospital. But what I remember, and of course my dad also was there to support her too, so I just remember there being this massive community of folks and just like extended family, and I do family in quotation marks because when you call a cousin, that's not actually like a related cousin. But I had so many people actually coming to the hospital to spend time with me. Obviously, like not providing like the medical assistance that I was getting from doctors, but like emotional support, like playing games with me, bringing me snacks that I liked so I wouldn't have to eat hospital food that wasn't that great. And it's really just heartwarming to think about that because it reminds me why I today show up for all of those folks in their times of need, be it health crises or other. So it's a nice kind of story to kind of go back to. So thanks for that question.
Thank you, Salem, and thank you, Haowen and Randy. I mean, exactly what Salem was saying at the end, right? Is that solidarity is so, you know it sometimes without even knowing that you know it. And it's something that you experience with people that you don't know it that well, or with people that you know really well. And it deepens your relationship in a beautiful way. And it takes to be in solidarity, right? It takes trusting that when you say that you need something, that other people in the community will come and meet those needs, but also trusting that when another person in the community says what they need, that you're going to be able to try and meet those needs or find a way to support them, right? And this is why we're talking about this in the context of grant making and the arts, right? Is because the three of you at Dance USA, at IndieSpace, and Salem, when you were at the Mosaic Network, the different ways that you structured your programs were all about fostering trust and developing a culture of solidarity. And I'm wondering if each of you, this time starting with Haowen, could share some examples of trust-based, non-hierarchical, artist-led work that you have guided at your jobs.
Thank you, Shruti. I will try, and I will say that it's a journey that I've been that Dance USA and the program that I'm running has been continuously learning about. And I want to talk primarily about this program called the Dance USA Fellowships to Artists. It's supported by the Doris Duke Foundation. It is a national fellowship program that supports artists whose work is at the intersection of social practice and embodied practice. So we're talking about community builders. We're talking about cultural bearing leaders, healing practices, storytellers, activists, justice-oriented work. And it's an unrestricted fellowship award of $31,000 unrestricted grant to 30 artists for the upcoming round, 25 artists that could be used at their own discretion. Now, we've done 2 rounds of this work. It's 3 years per round. We're about to launch the 3rd round in next month. But I want to talk a little backwards about how we got to do the way we do things. So, in terms of structure, DFA is a conventional open application program with a panel review process. There are a lot of great things around trust and solidarity that we're learning about from people in this room, from Randi, from Salem, and then Joe, who you will get to meet later. But I want to share a little bit about our journey. So the initial round of this program, when we selected the 30 artists that we wanted to support, and then we started to build the cohort activities, the initial cohort of artists really rejected our structure, our agenda. They felt it was too heavy-handed. They wanted more unstructured time. They wanted to be with one another. They wanted to connect. They wanted to share and deepen sharing sharing each other's practices. And we're not offering any of that. So they felt they felt we were top down. They felt the agenda wasn't nurturing and rejuvenating. They really rejected everything that we do. And they threw out the agenda. And then they did their own thing. So and so we started to tackle what happened and really started to reflect upon ourselves, right? So the feedback that we got is, which I already said, that they wanted time to connect. They don't want Dance USA to be in the way, right? And then they want us to acknowledge the capacity, the fullness of excellence that's already in the room. Right, and why do we feel we need to handle the space so much so that it could be meaningful, right? And then they want time together, but this was a little after this was right in the middle of the pandemic, so we offered a lot of Zoom spaces that people recommended people didn't show up much. So we began to think. So, well, long story short, we realized that we need to acknowledge the creative and organizing capacity of people that's already in the room, and that we need to follow the artist's desire around what they're seeing as the potential of the cohort, not how we're seeing it, right? And then we come in to build structures around their desire and want. So what we started doing in round 2 is that we built for each artist beyond the 30+K unrestricted award. We also set aside 33 hours per fellow for a 1 year period, where if they 3,300, I'm sorry, 3,300 at $100 at around at $100 an hour, if they want to connect with one another, right? And then they want to chat, they want to collaborate, they want to do work together, or they just want to chill and go to the spa, right? No productivity required, right? Like the fact that you're connecting with, which is what they told us, right? They want unstructured time to connect and share. Then we will honor that time, and then all they have to do is tell us it happened, and then we will then compensate them. And then we also set aside money for $1,000 each of the fellows to say, okay, if there are expenses around costs for those things to happen, we saw a lot of flight tickets, we saw hotel rooms, we saw Zoom accounts, etc. We'll cover up to $1,000. And it's entirely optional. You don't have to do any of this, right? If you choose not to do it, any remaining funds will divide it equally among the fellowship and give it out again as additional grants. So, fellows started offering each other residencies. They went to see each other's practices. They built their own retreats, etc. And about 729 of the 990 possible hours were tracked. I'm going to stop there. I hope I didn't spend too much time. I'm going to pass it back. Yeah.
Thank you, Haowen. Randi, I'm wondering if you could dovetail in and take it from there.
Sure. So IndieSpace, which is the product of a merger between the Indie Theater Fund and IndieSpace in 2022, is an organization that was built by artists for artists to address systemic inequities in philanthropy and real estate ownership and operation. So we have an unfair advantage in this conversation because the institution itself was meant to address the lack of partnership that we were feeling as artists with philanthropy, and well, I'll focus on philanthropy here because I could talk on and on about the real estate issues that we're facing as well as a community. So IndieSpace sees itself as a steward of our community's funds. The first program we put together was a nickel per ticket program where artists would contribute a nickel per ticket that they sold to their shows into a pot that then would be regranted back out to the artists, our indie theater community, and they would determine each year what that money went to. So at one point it was for one big project that benefited the entire community. Very quickly, they were, the artists that we were serving were telling us that it must go to artist fees, which it has stayed. Now that has turned into our Pay Your People grant. And we give out grants by lottery through the same system every single year. But the whole premise of the organization is to reach out to the community of artists that we're in service, that I'm one of those artists, and to create programs and funding that we need, that the community needs. So we do that through town halls. We have a very active artist committee that's compensated to give us feedback. We have requirement for our board to be made up 50% of working artists in the indie theater community. We have a Discord server that has an Ask Me Anything channel where we all go on, our board goes on, and you can ask us anything and be in constant communication. We have a survey twice a year, and most of our good ideas come from those surveys. So it's all based in, our mission is radically transparent, responsive, and equitable funding real estate programs, professional development, and advocacy. And so I'll just note one bit that kind of one example that I think magnifies this idea is that the Cultural Solidarity Fund that I met many of you through was the idea of Jimena Garnica. She is an artist and it leads Le May, which is a collective of immigrant artists in New York City. Jimena and a bunch of the artists within her collective were recipients of emergency funding that we gave out the day the theaters closed in March of 2020. And Jimena had, without having ever spoken to us, of course, but having received funds in a way that she needed to receive funds, in a way that her people needed to receive funds, there was an automatic trust that was built because we didn't ask any traumatizing narrative in our application. It was very simple. Our vibe is always get to the yes, prioritize those who are most deeply impacted. 71 to 93% of our funding every year goes to global majority artists, deaf and disabled artists, immigrant artists, and trans and gender nonconforming artists. So she felt prioritized and seen in that process. And when she had the wonderful idea for the Cultural Solidarity Fund, which mirrored our nickel per ticket idea, which is that those who can pitch in more should pitch in more when they can. Those who need should take more when they need more. And we were able to build that process together. She called me on the phone. I answered because my phone number is out there, probably more than it should be, but it is out there. And we talked through and we built a process, with 17 other amazing cultural organizations that pitched in and became the organizers of the Cultural Solidarity Fund. And we were really building the plane as we were flying it. It was, when I look back at the MOU between Jimena and I, it was really just like, let's try. That was the agreement that we made with one another. And I think working in trust and solidarity in that way allowed us to look at things that weren't working so well and try to pivot in the moment, address them as soon as they happen in the process when we can, and being transparent, radically transparent with the people that we're serving and with each other in order to make that happen.
Salem, do you want to jump in and talk a little bit about Mosaic?
Yeah, thank you, Shruti. So kind of like Haowen's, I think, example, this is also one of evolution and how, and kind of like what Randi was also saying about trying and figuring out sort of what works and what doesn't, and course correcting from there. I think that's kind of the story of the Mosaic Network and Fund. I didn't mention this. I am currently at the Mellon Foundation working on the Humanities in Place team. Previously worked at the New York Community Trust, managing arts and culture and preservation grant making. And one of the great privileges that I had during my time there was managing the Mosaic Network and Fund. The Mosaic Network and Fund is a learning network and collaborative fund that began in 2018. And this is, credited to Maureen Knighton of the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation and Carrie McCarthy of the New York Community Trust, who really got this thing going. And I should also mention there are hundreds of stakeholders and folks involved in this work. And so I am doing my best here to kind of think about all those folks when I talk about this work and really as sort of an organizer and kind of a hub for all of it. But going back to sort of that through line or like that narrative, it's really a story about kind of evolution when it comes to, having more distributed leadership, how to actually implement collective decision making, and then also ultimately how to create something where there's more shared ownership. So originally when the network and fund began, we kicked off learning network activities. This is where we would gather all network members for what we called learning exchanges. And the idea there was to really start to just have conversations around a variety of topics, really allow folks to build relationships, build trust, make new connections where they may not exist, strengthen connections that may already exist. And so that work started off for the first half of 2019. And then we had a pooled fund where we had raised some money to be able to re-grant to arts and cultural organizations of color in New York City. So I totally forgot to mention that, like, that is what this whole fund and network is about, is actually directing new and increased financial support to those organizations. And it was specific to the 5 boroughs of the city. I think when we first started the learning exchanges, there were maybe about 100, a little over 100 participants, a combination of leaders of BIPOC-led arts and cultural organizations, as well as funders. And when we launched the grant-making program, after those first series of learning exchanges concluded, it was kind of your, standard sort of competitive RFP process, right? So the invitation was extended not just to network members, but really to all sort of qualifying organizations, because we didn't want to exclude anyone, right, from sort of eligibility. Like, if you kind of met the basic criteria, everyone could apply. And the idea was actually to be able to make large multi-year grants to organizations. So, and part of it would be flexible support too. And so we launched that RFP, got about, I think, 200 responses to the RFP, and developed a panel process where we had folks in the field who wouldn't be conflicted out of the process. So these are mostly, individuals, independent contractors that are, deeply familiar with and knowledgeable about this segment of the cultural ecosystem, but are not necessarily affiliated with an applicant organization, participate, as well as donors to the fund. And that ultimately resulted in 27 grants, 3-year grants totaling about $4.5 million. So you'll note that I say 27 grants, which means 27 organizations out of the almost 200 only received funding. So as you can imagine, there was some additional work to do. And those grants were made in 2019, just right at the end of the year. So of course, in March 2020, a whole new world emerges with the pandemic. And then of course, by summertime with the murder of George Floyd, there were a number of social uprisings. And so, racial justice was really at the forefront, I think, of everyone's minds at the time. So it required a lot more work, which, the network, I think, was already starting to work on. We were already organizing the next series of learning exchanges to figure out sort of what's to come as we continue to build those relationships, even if the monies in the pooled fund had already been spent. And it became really clear that there was, urgent need, and that a lot of organizations were struggling. And so we kind of heard from the network that we needed to raise additional money and try to make grants again. And then at the same time, we also had completed an evaluation of some of our prior activities and really learned there that, there was a need to kind of rethink the sort of decision-making process around the grant making. So all those things kind of combined led to a second round of grants. And we decided to really take the findings from that evaluation to heart, which, really, I think, kind of critically assess that there was a need to really kind of put the decision in the hands of those that are most affected, and to not actually only rely on the input of a select few, right? So a panel process is not always going to be kind of the sort of end all be all, way to make decisions. And so that was interesting. And I think we decided, this might be an opportunity to actually just pose the question to the full network, right? The 200 plus people, and say, hey, we've raised another round, or we've raised $8 million for another round of grants. But, what do you think we should do with the $8 million? Like, what do you feel is most sort of urgent? So when we posed that question, we actually got solid responses, and folks really decided that it felt right to do another round of grants. About $5 million of the money should be used for grants to be made immediately, and those would support just emergency needs, right, for folks, because they were still kind of recovering from the effects of the pandemic. And then, we would actually hold on to $3 million of the monies raised to actually seed a new iteration of the Mosaic Network and Fund that would operate independently. And so that was a really, I think, just wonderful kind of demonstration. Even though we had initially created what we thought would be a time-limited endeavor, folks really saw the value in sort of the, collective kind of organizing and power building that was happening to really advocate for holding on to some of the monies to actually begin to envision what an independent entity might look like that would actually be led by practitioners and not be sort of a funder-driven, funder-initiated project. So we were able to make grants with the $5 million, and this time, as opposed to 27, the grants actually supported 168 organizations. They were one-year grants, but I think sort of true to like solidarity practices, this is really less about sort of the kind of amount that was going out to folks and more that everyone was actually able to get some help at a time of need. And one of the things that we did take into mind, thanks to the input of network members who participated in working groups, was a grant making process where we actually would use a formula where no one would really, you would have to apply, but it's not a narrative or anything. It's just basic organizational information so that we would be able to cut a check and provide larger grants, sort of larger portion of a group's operating budget for smaller budget organizations. And then you would see the percentages actually decreasing as the organizational budget increase. So it's kind of the inverse effect. And I think really wonderful thing that kind of emerged from that too is that there were instances where, some folks were so moved by the work that was happening that larger organizations actually did decline grants because they thought it would be more beneficial for smaller groups who may not be able to access resources in the same way. So that's kind of I think, example of kind of the evolution of that particular project and how it really transitioned into a more non-hierarchical sort of solidarity-based fund.
That's a beautiful transition, Salem, because all of this, right, is about building we all have emerging needs. And as you mentioned, right, at the end of 2019, the needs of art's ecosystem were different than in March 2020, than in June 2020, than right now. And as we want to be able to be nimble and confident enough to meet those needs, we also need infrastructure that we can rely on. And I hear that each of you have talked about these little seedlings that you've planted in your organizations. And I wonder if you could talk about sort of like windows of possibility that you see for infrastructural changes or infrastructural modifications that could more sustainably push against this, grant maker decision making being prioritized over more community and non-hierarchical grant making. Or if you haven't seen any of it on your own, are there any things that you're hearing about or you'd want to try out in your orgs? And Salem, I know you just talked, but I was going to kick it back to you. That's okay.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. Well, I mean, I think one of the best things or sort of lessons too in all of this work has been around like communications infrastructure, because there is, so much that can actually be alleviated just by getting rid of the informational disadvantages that folks are at. Like sometimes folks don't even know. They don't even know like what's available to them. They don't know where to go for help. And so the, opportunity to create some sort of communications infrastructure, be it one-on-one conversations and just making yourself accessible or, responding to emails, like trying to kind of develop these practices. But then also, huge shout out to the facilitation team at Kyung's Pacific Beat that actually really stewarded the Mosaic Network, and also Claudia Alick, who developed the Mosaic Network online platform. So that was sort of a hub that was created to actually allow folks to stay connected to one another, share information, continue to engage in exchange, even outside of like the organized convenings. So I think that that's a huge piece of it. And then in all of that communication too, like, I can't overemphasize this enough, but transparency and just being like honest about everything. I think it's really difficult. One of the biggest challenges I had coming into philanthropy, frankly, is like, understanding how to kind of navigate the both affordances and also constraints of like positional power, right? You are representing an institution. There are sort of delicate things that you kind of have to navigate in that sense, but also like, you know, you are a person and you have values, and how do you demonstrate your, you know, shared values with others, and sort of push up against that. So I think that, yeah, that's kind of how I would think of like infrastructure needs and how to kind of, you know, resist where it makes sense.
Thank you, Salem. I'm gonna go to Haowen next, but while Haowen speaks, I'm gonna also remind folks that are in the room that if you have any things that you heard Salem, Haowen, Randi name as infrastructural changes, these little seedlings, windows of possibility for where we can have more trust, if you want to drop things in the chat, we'd love that. Also, if you want to chime in after Haowen and Randi speak, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you. But off to you, Haowen.
I think in my opinion that if you want to build and sustain trust, you have to first create the basis for it. And that basis of work isn't the work to build trust yet. So for example, you have to compensate artists for anything that you're asking them or even inviting them to do, even for their own benefit. If you're asking for their time for anything, you have to compensate their time, period. So, and that's not even the work. That's what I'm saying, right? It's not even the work. That's just the basis of equity, right? And with equity, you can then start talk about pushing against hierarchy or even building trust. My other thought here, and this is a little bit from my own learning in the past few years of running my program, is that don't push for alignment. You don't, and this goes to bigger things, but it also goes to small things, right? You don't need to edit their bios so they sound the same, right? You don't need to cut people, you know, you said 250 words for bio and then someone gave a 500 word, you tell them to give me something that's 250, please, right? Like honor, you don't need that, right? If you know, for our data purposes, we really try not to use any kind of multiple choice demographic questions or questions about their practice and genres and forms, right? It's open-ended questions. And then we really tried, the feedback I received from my consultant was don't streamline anything, right? If you get Lindy Hop, right, and then you get swing, don't put them under social dance. Say Lindy Hop, say swing, right? So then you get a fullness of the reality of our ecosystem, and then you work with that, and then it becomes a very different picture. I'll stop there. I'll pass it to Randi.
So for us, it's about transparency and it's about removing barriers of entry. So I think some infrastructure bits like our Discord server, which is finding ways to communicate online with our community the way they want to be communicated with. I've had to like get hip to it and learn how to do it. My child taught me how to be on Discord. So I think meeting people where they're at and letting that be is important to build trust, and also figuring out what our positional power is and trying to open the gates and remove a barrier. So we started a seat at the table program where we bring small budget arts organizations with us to our meeting. We're an intermediary, so we understand then that the role we play as a funder to our community, but also seeking funds consistently in order to make that happen. So we bring arts organizations with us to our funder meetings, and we give them an opportunity to introduce their work to the funder. We send a link to their website ahead of time so that the funder can can be introduced to this new small budget organization. They get a quick minute, because my time doesn't get extended because I'm bringing people to the meeting, but they get a quick minute to introduce their work. And then they listen. They hear how we talk about our work. They hear that we say, I don't know the answer to that sometimes, and I'll get right back to you. And then they get to ask at the end a question or two of the funder. And we're finding that it's completely changing their perspective about what non-transactional, these conversations are, they are transactional. I think it was Daniel who pointed out in one of our meetings, there is no non-hierarchical practice when one person has resources and others don't. And so we have to recognize that dynamic and see where we can navigate through it in solidarity as best we can, and recognizing our own agency within our institutions. And that's different for everyone. The reality is the reality, right? So I have a lot more freedom to make those choices in my organization that was built around this premise, versus somebody that is trying to navigate beautifully within their values, within their own institution, but finding the holes and finding the places where we can align ourselves, I guess, is infrastructure. I think I answered that question. I'll leave it at that.
No, I think that's absolutely it. And I think it goes back to what you said in the beginning of your answer, right? It's about transparently figuring that out together, and making space for that, because the way that the system is set up right now, we're not resourced to think, in terms of flat structures or in terms of solidarity. It's designed for individualism, for exploitation, for extraction. And so when we begin to openly just name that, hey, that's not how it should be, and that you're struggling with it, we can begin to build the basis, like Haowen was saying, for a system, for a new world, for another world. Are there any other folks who are in the room who maybe want to chime in and talk about some little seedlings, some windows of possibility that they're hearing, to foster some trust, some solidarity, to push against hierarchy in their workspaces? And a reminder, you can raise your hand by going to the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and then pressing the raise hand function, or you can drop it in our chat or in our Q&A function. While folks are mustering up their answers, I'll also say that if you have any questions that you want to ask Salem, Haowen, Randi, you're also welcome to drop those in the chat. I know that Erie Arts and Culture has a few, and I welcome Randi and Salem to check those out in our Q&A function. Aha, there are some hands up. Jess, could you help us with our hand raised folk?
I see Amber's here with us, Shruti.
Amazing. Hi, Amber. I don't know if I can't see you, but please do join us and speak up. Yeah.
Hi,
Amber. There we go. Oh, Leilani, yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Leilani speaking. I use she, series pronouns. I am calling in from the intersection of the Mississauga and Malden Rivers. And I work for New England Foundation for the Arts. It wasn't a deep thought, just I was hearing a lot about trust and hierarchy as, whether intentionally or not, they feel very framed in this conversation as being not mutually exclusive, but challenging to have. It is incredibly difficult to build even towards a non-hierarchical practice without trust, and you cannot ask folks to step out of hierarchy and trust that it will be actually non-hierarchical and not just putting themselves in front of fire without trust, and just naming that dynamic as a thing that I was hearing repeatedly.
Yes, thank you, Leilani. Amber, please do go ahead and. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. Apologies for that mishap. Thank you all so much for your time, energy, and wisdom. I appreciate you all. I'm Amber Paradin. I'm here on behalf of The Medium, which is a radically inclusive space in downtown Springdale, Arkansas. So I'm here to learn from you all, and I have a team member on the call as well. We have a micro-granting program that we do from this space called the Creative Exchange Fund. Much like yourselves, we are just making stuff up as we go, and we're leading with our hearts and trying to do what's right at every step of the way. And so we are about to relaunch applications, but what we have learned from the community is that, well, we've learned a lot, and I won't go into all of that, but I think we would like to simplify the application process. And Randy, you had said, I've lost my notes here, but you said that don't ask traumatizing narrative questions. I'd like to hear more about what that means for you. But also a couple of things. What are the platforms that you all are using that feel the most progressive, with the least informational disadvantage, that we're not having to create hard applications? I mean, that's really the heart of it. How can we simplify this and still be equitable at the end of the day? I'll stop there, but would love to hear what you all have to say, what platforms you're using, and what those questions can look like that keep it very simple and still equitable. Thank you again.
Thanks, Amber. So we were using just Google Forms for 10 years. Doing this work, everybody could access it for the most part. Those that can use, that have internet and are using the computer could access it. We had to move to Submittable just in order to manage the volume that we were receiving as our fund grew. I don't love it though. I'm just telling you, I don't love it, and neither do the people that are applying. And so we're thinking about what that might look like, to either go back to Google Forms or to find some other platform that feels accessible and equitable. And as far as not asking traumatizing questions, we have a mental health program, for example. We give mental grants, micro grants for mental health care on a monthly basis for one-to-one therapy, medication, meditation, or whatever an artist needs to care for their mental health. And we ask, we do have a drop down, just in general, what do you plan on using these funds for? Medication, therapy, whatever, your co-pays, whatever it might be, rather than asking them to talk about how they're suffering in this moment. If we believe if an artist is coming to us for a mental health grant, they can at least show us that they're an artist that's consistently working in their practice in New York City, so that we're within our mission, that we're going, it's a trust-based philosophy, and that we're going to ask them the simplest question to get to the information that we need in order to move the grant forward. And we always hope to get to the yes. Our intention is to always try to fund as many or most of our applicants as possible. We don't have a merit-based process in any of our applications, and we do a lot of our work by lottery anyway. Most of our grant making is done by lottery, a weighted lottery, to prioritize the groups that we're prioritizing. So to us, it's about simplifying the application and being very specific about what the application is for. And so also during COVID, lots of people were experiencing health issues. They were experiencing food insecurity, housing insecurity. And so we don't ask them to relay that anymore than in the most basic terms, in order for us to have the information we need to process the grant. I hope that's helpful.
Shruti, I'll just say 2 sentences. I know we're strict on time. Amber, I think in terms of traumatizing questions that's a whole workshop in and of itself, but I'll try to tackle the application system. My best answer to that is don't stick to one process. If there are people who are comfortable with cloud-based, great submissions processes like Submittable. There are people who are not. Allow people to send something in through email. Allow someone to send something in with written applications. We at Dance USA, we allow people to, if people wants their entire application in Chinese, we translate it to Chinese, and then they can submit it in Chinese, then we translate it back into English. Like, go out of your way to not make it a mono pathway as much as possible. I think last sentence, I think sometimes we grant makers create so much harm so that we protect our own capacity. Our capacity is important, but it's not an excuse to sustain the harmful practices that we're doing. There's too much done there because we are understaffed, and then it shouldn't be that binary. I'll stop there.
That is very, very important. And as somebody who submits a lot of grant applications, it is so relieving when a grant maker works with us and finds different ways to do a report over the phone, over coffee, making visual art to talk about what we did. It's really affirming and also inspiring. I know we've got a few different questions in the Q&A. I'm going to ask one question from Karen about advice for paying artists for their time and then I'm going to also, after that, take one last question, and then we'll segue into breakout rooms. Oh, sorry, I didn't even read the question. Karen asks, do you have a good formula or advice for paying artists for their time? Or have you considered that on an individual / case-by-case basis? Any folks? Oh, I see Mid-Atlantic Arts in the chat. Feel free to, again, raise your hand if you'd like to speak, or panelists, or folks can chime in the chat.
I'll speak because I used to work at Mid-Atlantic Arts. Go Mid-Atlantic Arts, go Baltimore. So I try to pay everyone. If I pay this real smart, important person $100 an hour, I'm gonna pay my artist $100 an hour. So I try to make it level and sort of abundant as possible. Then sometimes that means we get to do less. So we really like to do something, and we not cross the line of saying, okay, we're gonna ask people to volunteer their time. We don't do it, and then we pay well.
Any other folks want to talk about experiences paying artists for their time, advice? I can say that at Art.coop, one of the things that we've learned is that it's really important to offer, just like what Haowen said, right? Multiple different ways of applying and receiving funding. You need to be able to receive money, whether that's through a cash, through checks, through a bank transfer, all of those things. We've also tried to do gift cards and just making the purchase for an artist, which lessens the tax burden, all of these things.
We do a lot of that as well. And also keep in mind, we have an option for people to let us know if they're unbanked or if they're using check cashing services, so that we can include the fees for check cashing services into our grants when needed. And for us, we calculate a living wage and we pay artists. I think at this point for us, it's generally no less than $28 an hour for work with us. But we're not producing work in this way. So that would be for their work on our artist committee or for meetings or anything that we ask them to show up for.
And I'll just add, the Mosaic Network and Fund was primarily supporting organizations. And so just an acknowledgement of folks' time and contributions to the conversations that we would be facilitating and the convenings that we would offer. We did provide, I think it was like $250 per town, or I'm sorry, not town hall, per session, like learning exchange. So every time someone showed up, it was just really an acknowledgement of their time and contributions. And it is something that we really budgeted for. So it was a huge part of our expenses too, is just making sure that we actually have the monies available to be able to compensate folks for showing up.
If folks are comfortable staying 5 minutes, it'd be really great to just have some learnings shared back. I'm just going to open up the space. If you want to chime in, you can drop stuff in the chat. Go ahead and put it in Q&A, or again, you can raise your hand and Jess will unmute you so that you can chime in about some different windows of possibility. All right. In my facilitator hat, 10 seconds of silence. I'm gonna ask Alexis, could you be our first to share maybe?
Yeah, we spent some time talking about like gathering in person and the different ways that that can look, and had some really great examples from the group about how they're doing that or planning to do that with their grantees and other partners.
Amazing. Maybe let's take it to Daniel.
Sure, yeah. I think our conversation was really mostly circling around the idea of how what kind of tools and processes for accountability, feedback, and communication look like, or how those tools serve a solidarity relationship within like a grant making relationship, particularly, and talking a little bit within that about how right, solidarity really is supposed to mean like we're on equal footing together, actually, right? That neither party should be fully subservient to the other, because again, that's just creating a relationship of domination, as opposed to like we are all here working for a better world together. So how do we build that relationship, and how we communicate with one another, our systems for receiving feedback in both directions, right? How do we support that?
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, we had a kind of wandering conversation that was really nice. And some of the things that came up was involving more cultural elements of the community you serve into your programming, and taking those cues from the people and communities you serve. One of the challenges that came up is the constraints of the family foundation model, organizational model, and what you can do, what you can't do with the integration of family members. And then the challenge of figuring out how to extend pandemic relief programs, because that shows that we can do right, and how to continue to do those practices that we adopted during the onset of the pandemic, and the very real tension of resources on hand versus need. And then we had an artist in our group, and we too talked about feedback mechanisms for honest communication and lessening the pressure of grantees feeling like they have to only share that things went perfectly. And so that's a little bit of our conversation.
Thank you, Joe. Haowen, would you like to share what you learned?
Yep. Hi, everyone. So our group had a wonderful conversation, sharing a little bit about each other's work, and sort of, I think if I am to synthesize, I think there was always a feeling of either examples of feeling under a lot of hierarchy, or that they're experiencing some form of sort of structure that's closer to non-hierarchical structures, and that sort of feeling of being nurtured is very different. And also that there was mentioning about sort of like artists not in sort of this solidarity framework about thinking about artists and labor. Like artists do not separate themselves in the solidarity economy movement. Artists shouldn't be looking at themselves as separate from laborers, caregivers, I think, and et cetera. We're all workers. So I think that, and that sort of this agency work of sharing agency and taking the sort of the structural system design work, that's labor too, and needs to be compensated and needs to be cared for, etc. So that's some of the conversation that we've had.
Yes, cultural workers. Salem, do you want to wrap us and then?
Yeah, sure. So kind of related to what some folks had said before too, we actually spent a good chunk of our time talking about, well, one, sort of the default, like in a, capitalist society, I think the inclination is to kind of, default into hierarchical practices, especially in a professional context. So what are like the small and sort of simple steps one could take and to kind of incorporate practices that are non-hierarchical, that might seem really like, it's kind of like low-hanging fruit, but you might not ever think about it. So great example that we talked about was like rotating, let's say you have regular standing meetings, rotating kind of the agenda, sort of who develops the agenda, who facilitates those meetings, and giving folks the opportunity to lead, and also sort of in a collective, allowing folks to have shared ownership over whatever it is that you're meeting about. And then related to what Alexis said too, the meeting in person piece, instead of kind of, I think Allison Alford is a really great example, advancing Black arts in Pittsburgh, which instead of inviting, folks to meet in a conference room, you host a cookout, right? And sort of, make it feel like it's not sort of a high stakes situation, and actually be able to engage in conversation that way. So thanks to the folks in that group for offering suggestions.
Oh, I love all of this. And I'm going to wrap us up. But one of the things that came up in my group was about how we have a lot of these tools and a lot of these grants, but it's all about reaching our communities and making sure that they know what's going on. And to that end, we've put together a little document that y'all are welcome to add to. Got some resources that are hopefully helpful. Share it wide, read it deeply. And it's also just been really, really, really amazing to share space with each of you and to be able to facilitate and join everyone. And I want to thank each of you for coming in. I am going to pass it back to Jamie, and we'll close out.
Hi, everyone. This is Jamie. Thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. Just a reminder, the work at Grantmakers in the Arts is not merely about allocating resources, but about reshaping the very fabric of grant-making systems ingrained in racial capitalism. By advocating for a shift in power dynamics and emphasizing learning and organizing, as we discussed in today's webinar, GIA works to challenge traditional notions of decision-making and resource allocation through prioritizing voices from artists and fostering partnerships that embody trust and economic democracy. We aspire to pave the way for alternative approaches to grant making. As we reflect on the insights shared today, we are reminded of the importance of solidarity both within and beyond institutional boundaries. GIA's call to identify, interrupt, and create other ways of being in grant making serves as a catalyst for transformative change, urging us all to disrupt entrenched patterns of institutional power and embrace a more equitable and inclusive future. And we encourage you all to provide us with some feedback about your experience today through the survey link, which will be dropped in the chat. And also everyone who is registered, even if they weren't able to make it today, will receive a follow-up email with the resources from our speakers and a recording of today's webinar. Thank you again for bearing with us through all of our technical difficulties, and thank you to all of our incredible speakers and facilitators today. And we hope you can join us for our next webinar, The Richness of Southern Soils, Supporting Black Farming and Food, as part of our Move the Money series on Tuesday, June 4th. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.